Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099 and I am here to review a trade paperback collection of a comic book series. This is Doom Patrol, We Who Are About to Die. It collects the first 6 issues of the Doom Patrol series from 2009, written by Keith Giffen. This collection does not collect the backstories that were in each of the single issues. There was a backup story in each issue featuring the Metal Men, and those backup stories are not featured in this book. So if you want all of the comic as it appeared on the stands, then you're going to be out of luck if you want to buy this book. So I'm just putting that out there right up front. I myself am not a gigantic Metal Men fan, so this didn't bother me a great deal. On to the book itself. I am a really huge fan of the Doom Patrol. I like what I've read, which admittedly is not a lot, but admittedly there isn't a whole lot of the Doom Patrol to read. Especially for someone like me, I exclusively read trade paperbacks and graphic novels. I do not go back issue hunting, and so there's over half of the Doom Patrol's history that is not available to someone like me until DC Comics decides to put all of the Doom Patrol stuff into trades, and I highly doubt that that's going to happen anytime soon, and that will feature in this video toward the end of the video. But for now, I just have to say, if you are familiar with my channel, you know I am a pretty huge fan of the X-Men. And if you've seen the Doom Patrol before, you might say that they are pretty similar to the X-Men. The Doom Patrol actually appeared 3 months before the X-Men did. They are both, naturally, like I said, very similar. They both are led by a man in a wheelchair. The Doom Patrol are led by Dr. Niles Calder, and in both instances, in both franchises, the teams are considered to be outcasts, freaks, whatever have you, monsters. The Doom Patrol, a little bit more so. I would say the X-Men lead a slightly more glamorous lifestyle compared to the Doom Patrol. And this team, this franchise has gone through many different, I don't want to say quite reboots, although there has been a little bit of that going on with this series. It started in the 1960s, it ran for a little while, and then when the series was ready to be canceled, I believe it was sales, just poor sales, that were dictating that it end, the creators decided to do something a little risky that you didn't do back in the 1960s. They decided to kill off their team. They said, well, if we have to end the series, we might as well do something that nobody else is doing. So they killed the Doom Patrol. About 9 years later, comic book creator Paul Cooperberg, he brought back the Doom Patrol with a few new members and Robot Man. He was the only one who, according to Cooperberg's story, survived the explosion. And then that relaunch only lasted 3 issues, and then once again Paul Cooperberg returned to relaunch the team once again in 1987. And this lasted for 18 issues before Grant Morrison came in and basically tore apart the team, and he decided to do whatever he wanted, which in my opinion was a really fantastic run of comic books. I highly recommend all 6 volumes of Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol. Around this time, the team started going through some very strange changes. There were members who were dying or getting killed off, and these changes were largely seen as not reversible. Quite often you'll have a character, if they die in comic books, it's pretty easy to bring them back, and naturally in this book that I'm going to be reviewing in this video, all of the characters were at one point allegedly dead and they're now back, so that is testament to what I just said. But at a certain point, I believe it was immediately after Grant Morrison left the title, the series was published under the Vertigo line of comic books, and I believe anything that is published under Vertigo for the purposes of, say, a Superman comic book, those are not considered to be canon within the DC universe. I don't entirely understand it, especially if you go back and read the early Vertigo stuff like Morrison's Doom Patrol, Morrison's Animal Man, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Those comic books are tentatively part of the DC universe, so it was only years later, whenever the Vertigo line was in full force, that it really became kind of the party line that no, these comic books do not take place in the same world that Batman and the Justice League take part in. So then in the 90s we had another Doom Patrol run, and I know very little about this run because it hasn't been collected in trades, and then that ended, and then in the 2000s in a storyline in the JLA series, writer Chris Claremont and artist John Byrne introduced the Doom Patrol for the air quotes very first time. This is a very hazy storyline. I've read it once or twice, and it doesn't entirely make sense to me because at this point, the Justice League had not really been rebooted since Crisis on Infinite Earths. The Doom Patrol had been around since Crisis on Infinite Earths. They met the Justice League. The Justice League should have remembered the Doom Patrol. As of this storyline, the 10th Circle, the JLA was meeting this team called the Doom Patrol. The Justice League did not seem to remember the Doom Patrol. This version of the Doom Patrol completely disregarded all of the Doom Patrol stories since forever. This was basically like a complete relaunch of the team. All the characters who had been dead or had any history at all, that was all completely reversed, and this was as if they were appearing for the very first time. And then after this air quotes debut appearance in the Justice League comic, this version of the Doom Patrol got their very own comic book. It ended fairly soon, and then Infinite Crisis came along. Infinite Crisis is pretty infamously known for the Superboy Prime punching reality scene, where Superboy Prime was trapped inside this parallel dimension and he started punching the walls of reality, I poo you not, and then this changed certain aspects of reality. So Jason Todd was technically dead, and then Superboy Prime punches reality and Jason Todd is no longer dead. That's essentially what happened there. And then Superboy Prime punching reality basically reconciled all of the history of the Doom Patrol. It was saying, well, all of the original Doom Patrol's history, it technically happened. These characters remember all of it happening, but at the same time we want to keep some of the things from the John Byrne run. So now instead of Niles Calder's head being detached from the rest of the body and put on a tray of ice, he's back to being a full body in a wheelchair. And instead of Rita Farr being dead as she was since the 1960s, now she's back to life just as she was in the John Byrne run. And that brings us to this book. Ordinarily, I would not go into such detailed history for a comic book team when I'm about to review a book for that team. But I feel like with the Doom Patrol, it is partly necessary because if you are unfamiliar with the Doom Patrol, you might be a little bit confused with this book. Or maybe if you are familiar with the Doom Patrol, you might be even more confused. I would almost say somebody who doesn't know all the stuff about Doom Patrol that a fan of the series and the franchise would know, they might actually have an easier time reading this book than someone who is a fan, because you've got all this contradictory backstory going on. You're not actually sure what has been rebooted away, what still remains as part of the history, and so that's kind of nagging in the back of your head when you're reading this book. And that was definitely the experience that I had reading We Who Are About to Die. Now, I will say this book, once you are able to get past that feeling, is actually a very good book. Like I say, I've really only read the Grant Morrison run on the Doom Patrol. I would really like to read the Silver Age stuff, I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But in my opinion, We Who Are About to Die feels very true to what Grant Morrison was doing in the early 1990s. The characters feel very gruff, very gritty, and not in that really bad way that the 1990s is known for, where you have characters like Youngblood or basically anything from Image Comics where it's air quotes gritty and dark because that was what was really popular in the mid-1980s. I feel like the Doom Patrol is quirky, but it's still very dark. It's still very gruff. It is not a friendly comic book. It makes you a little bit uncomfortable when you're reading it, and that is definitely the feeling that I get when I'm reading We Who Are About to Die, and I feel like that is intentional. I feel like Keith Giffen definitely has his finger on the same pulse that Grant Morrison did when he was working on the comic book in the 1990s. So I definitely feel like that is a plus for this comic book. The villains that we get in this book, at least in the first half of the book, they feel very odd, very bizarre, and that is definitely something that would normally be happening in a Doom Patrol comic book. I think if you went any less bizarre, any less quirky than what these black hole face villains are, then you wouldn't really have a Doom Patrol type of villain. I think these guys absolutely feel at home in a Doom Patrol comic. The second half of this book is a tie-in to the Green Lantern crossover Blackest Night. I have not read that crossover. I doubt that I ever will. The premise of that crossover I know what it is. I knew what it was going into this. So if you know a little bit about Blackest Night, then you're probably not going to be too terribly confused reading this. The basic premise was that dead comic book heroes are now coming back to life to come and torment the living heroes. And that is put to good use in this book, because if you're not familiar with Doom Patrol, a lot of characters have died who were on this team. So it's really nice to see some of those characters coming back, and we get to see their reaction to the still living members of the Doom Patrol. And there's especially one character who comes back. I don't want to ruin who that is, but it is a very neat surprise getting to see that character as one of the Blackest Lantern characters, if you will. One minor issue that I did have here is that the Blackest Night crossover tie-ins with the Doom Patrol comic, it kind of interrupts the narrative. The first half of this book is dealing with one threat, and then the Doom Patrol, they come back to their headquarters and they have to deal with the Blackest Night tie-in, and then it just kind of ends. We don't really know what happens next. You have to go and buy Volume 2 to find out. And then the final issue of this book is pretty handy for someone like me. Like I said earlier, I wasn't really sure what all of the Doom Patrol history actually counts as part of their backstory and what all has been wiped away by various crises. And this final issue is basically the life of Larry Traynor, who is the Negative Man. And this basically tells you from his perspective everything that is part of the Doom Patrol's history. Admittedly, some of it doesn't make any sense. I'm still a little wary on what all from John Byrne's run on the Doom Patrol, what all actually counts and what all does not count, what's been wiped away, because it pretty quickly just kind of ignores all of the John Byrne stuff. We do get a page acknowledging that that stuff happened, but it's not really clear how it happened and how it is still in line with everything else that happened. So I don't know, and I don't think even the creators are entirely certain if they know. But I will say, although I was having some issues with this book at first, I wasn't really sure if it was working for me, I was really enjoying it by the time I finished it, and I have already ordered Volume 2 online. I do have a bit of a gripe here. Remember earlier I mentioned that DC Comics is very unlikely to collect all of the other Doom Patrol series, and that is sadly applicable to this series as well. Apparently, a few years ago, right around the time when the DC New 52 got started, there was solicitations for a third volume that would have finished off this Doom Patrol series. Apparently, this series, Doom Patrol volume whatever, whichever run this series is, it ended because of the New 52 getting started. And apparently, in addition to that, DC Comics decided, well, if the series is over, we don't have to finish collecting it. So if you are like me, if you only buy trade paperbacks and graphic novels, you can buy the first 2 graphic novels. It collects, I guess, 2/3 of this series, and then the final 7 or so issues of this series, they solicited it as being a trade paperback that they were going to put out, and then they decided, no, let's not do that. So they canceled it, and that makes me very upset. I am not happy that they did this. I am not happy that there's only 9 Doom Patrol graphic novels when there could easily be twice that many, and you still wouldn't have covered all of the Doom Patrol's comics over the years. I don't like that, but it's just something I'm going to have to live with. I mentioned that I had some issues with this book, and that is in addition to my feelings of apprehension whenever I wasn't sure what all the history of the Doom Patrol was. In addition to that, I was having a little bit of trouble really figuring out what the status quo for the Doom Patrol was. And I would say by the end of this book, that's pretty easy to figure out. It gets you there eventually. But this is something that if I was reading it in single issues, if I read the first issue of this series, I don't think I would have come back for issue 2. It's very muddy. It's not really clear what the status quo is. That is made more clear as the series keeps going, but it's not as clear as it could have been. I think they could have made the status quo a little bit more easy to understand. I do think once you are able to understand what their new mission statement is, what the new norm for this series is, it's a really good status quo in my opinion. This is a series, I think, that it could have gone on for a very long time. This could have lasted 40 issues just based on what we have going on in this first volume. I don't want to talk a whole lot about it because I've already been rambling quite a bit. I do want to say, if you aren't sure if you should go and pick this up, I would say go ahead and give it a shot. Keep in mind that if you are like me and you only buy graphic novels, you won't be able to get the complete Keith Giffen Doom Patrol series thanks to DC Comics being a bunch of stupid idiot heads. I would definitely say this is some good comics. You can read whatever is available to you in the 2 trade paperbacks that are out there. I am going to definitely read Volume 2, and I intend to enjoy myself while I can. And that is about all I have to say on this book. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I hope you will like, share, comment, and subscribe. I will be back tomorrow with another kind of video. I will see you later. Have a good day.